So this is actually our first Roads to Research session of the year here at Cohere for AI. And for those of you just joining, this is a program where we work to demystify everything it takes to be an ML researcher. I think often it can feel like there's this secret body of knowledge that some people had access to, and maybe you missed that day of class. But we're just working here to shine a light on some of those things, particularly stuff that's not often talked about in terms of all the things that happen behind the scenes before, you know, someone has some big paper announcement on Twitter. How did they get there? And today's going to be a really practical session for that. If you want to catch up on any of our past programs, I'll put a link in a chat where you can find these. There've been some really strong talks, and you can catch them on YouTube or on our podcast. We started with one from Sarah Hooker that was all sorts of tips and tricks about being a researcher, from seeking out support to attending your first conference. And then we had a panel conversation Marzieh hosted on ideation. Again, very strong. Where do research ideas even come from? After that, we had sessions on applying to positions both in industry and in academic contexts. Really practical tips in both of these if you're looking for roles in these spaces. And then most recently, a really, really nice conversation on the role of mentorship in this field, how to find a mentor, how to make the most out of that potential relationship, and other ways to get support on your work. Okay. I've just put a link in the chat where you can find links to all of these, but enough of the past. Let's get to the present. Today, I'm really delighted to be joined by my two colleagues, Ahmet and Marzieh, both senior research scientists here at Cohere for AI, doing something a little different this time. Often we've had panel conversations in this series, but today we've got a thorough, I think, 72-slide presentation to work you through that is filled with practical tips on the journey of a research paper. So I'll stop there and hand it over to you both. I think with my host abilities, I can't make you co-host, so I might just leave it to you to screen share. That might be easiest. Nice. Okay, Ahmet's going to take this on.
Let me share a quick then.
Thanks, Ahmet.
Yes.
And then just before we begin, I'll say we'll work through these. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat throughout, and we'll get to as many of your questions as possible at the end. And we can always continue the conversation offline too. But with that, over to you, Ahmet and Marzieh.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm quite excited to be here and talk about generally like how to do research in different point of view, like with some practical tips, some general comments, suggestions. Also, I'm quite looking forward to hear what you would say in the chat or like after the talk in the questions. So this is our, when we say about like a road to research or like talking about a research project, I think it is like, of course, this is a very multifaceted job. So there's a lot to cover. Probably we are not able to covering all the stuff, but we split it into multiple pieces. One is experimental management. The second one is like how to write paper with practical tips and with the general concepts. And then quite important, communicating your research. So we will be switching with Marzieh for different phases, and I will start with experimental management. So I think this is really one of the fundamental piece of the research, especially in our field, because I'm sure all of you are familiar, but often we have lots of experiments in a project, and sometimes super hard to manage these experiments. Even before, how to design these experiments are really kind of important. That's why we want to cover this, and we want to start with that. So these are the main kind of highlight that I wanted to talk about. I will go a little bit more into each of them, but in general, what should we pay attention for any experiment? I think this is a really important question, because this is not about as you start the project, but even before, when you are designing your research. I think this is you should have some answers, maybe not complete, but some answer for these questions. So for an experiment, in my opinion, first thing that you should have that you are trying to answer. I think this is the first thing. The second one is like, okay, what are the baselines and how are you comparing your method proposal or your idea with the baselines? This obviously you need to have an evaluation, like what sort of evaluation that you are doing within that project. And like we keep seeing this from our own experience, like details. These are really important to manage or to design experiments. And obviously, especially as a machine learning researchers, all of us needs to put some attention to like resources, right? This is compute or time, different functions of resources in general. Let's go a little bit deep into each of them and talk a little bit, but I will try to make it very short. So the first thing, like, as I said, like, what are the questions that you are trying to answer with each experiment? So I see that throughout my PhD, sometimes you are really excited about an idea and you run like hundreds of experiments, which is, I mean, possible if you are doing in small scale experiments, but then you have like hundreds of results and it's super difficult to interpret or like analyze those results, right? I think instead of doing this, like launching lots of different experiments, you should really think carefully from the beginning, okay, what experiments that I am running for what questions, what I am trying to answer. And when you are answering a question with an experiment, I think you should have a hypothesis or sort of expectation. Okay, I'm expecting, or like, this is my hypothesis. I am testing this hypothesis with this set of experiments, and this is the results after you get. I think this will definitely help you to organize your research ideas, organize your experiments, and to understand the results. These are, I would say, quite important. And also, like, this will be really important that we will talk when you are writing the paper, because this is about a narrative, right? This is not about like a particular experiment, but you want to show something, and experiments could serve this narrative in general. Second thing, about the baselines. Again, oftentimes when we are proposing a method, when we are building a model, or maybe you are trying to show something with a data set, most of the time you have a baseline. I think from the beginning, defining these baselines, it's really important, because this will allow you to keep track of the progress or like a comparison with your experiments. You may have different baselines. I think it's nicer to have strong baseline that you are trying to reach, like sort of North Star, let's say, but also you need to have some sort of lower bound worst case baseline that will allow you to do like a sanity checking for your, because if the idea will work or not with this worst case baseline, you will understand from the beginning. Together with the baselines, of course, you have something to compare, which are baselines, but also you need to have an evaluation set that, okay, what are we measuring, how we are comparing against baselines, right? This may change throughout the project. You may add more, but I think you should have a core set of evaluation set, like this could be data set, tasks, depends on the project, I think. But this core set should be decided, at least you should have a good, really strong idea about what core set of evaluation you have for any project. Moving forward, this paying attention to details, I think this is really, really important. And in general, I think this is something overlooked, or like, sorry, underlooked aspect of experiment or a research project, especially if you are doing a PhD or master, or you are doing some independent research. Again, you might be really like hyped about the idea, and you will run lots of different things, but small details will make big differences. I think paying these super small details is super important. Like putting them in somewhere, like could be a data set, could be a hyperparameter, even like a super simple, could be a checkpoint where you are saving the checkpoints, because you will revisit that or you will reuse that checkpoint later on. I think these are very, very important. And I know in the machine learning projects, there is much more than this, right? Like you are preparing a training data set and you are filtering, for example. How you filter a very small regex might be of a different data set that you will train. And you will probably be using this data set for all the experiments. So you need to be really careful and very transparent about those details in general, in your opinion. The the next thing is the resources. So here, of course, we are working with the relatively larger scale models, or scale of the models getting increased over time. This is one thing. You don't need to work always with large models, but you always need to keep in mind that, okay, what sort of scale that I am working on, what experiments that I can run in what scale, and how long it will take. Because this will sort of allow you to set a pace for your project. If you are training, I don't know, 100 billion parameter models, then of course it will take more time based on the cluster that you are using. Or if you're training like a 200 million model with the cluster that you have, maybe it will be much faster. I mean, I'm not saying you should make a super high pace for each project, but you should know these details so that you can set the pace. I think this is important for you and for your, in general, collaborators. These are some little bit practical tips here for the experimental management. I think it's really nice to put all the experimental logs visible in one place. From my own experience as a project lead or even a collaborator, doesn't matter. Like it's for yourself, also for your collaborators. Having all the experimental results somewhere, all the experimental logs somewhere, all the details somewhere, would allow you to revisit, would allow your collaborators to look at and understand what's going on in the project. This could be a Google Doc, this could be a Notion page, but also this should be probably also for some experimental log management system, could be weight and biases, or could be another version of this, so that in one place you see the results, logs, the details, but in another place you will see, okay, how for each experiment, what are the metrics that you care, and how this your experiment looks like in terms of those metrics. And this is, I think, the last piece, but I also think this is really nice. So as like a junior researchers, I was also a junior researcher some time ago, and generally, like, you do lots of experiments again, you do lots of like a hacky coding. Then at the end of the project, you try, when you want to publish the paper, you have like another couple of weeks that you try to clean the code base because you want to release the code, right? So instead of doing that, you could set this from the beginning. Okay, this is my repository. Every experiment, I am putting this script. This is to run that experiment. This is how I run this experiment. I think these are really important for you because you will probably rerun that experiment to replicate or to fix something. Also for your collaborators in case they want to check or they want to also replicate or run something similar. So having this continuous, like taking this as like a continuous and like a throughout the project rather than at the end of the project, I think this would be very, very helpful for you. I think these are for the experimental management. Now I will pass to Marzieh for fun parts.
Yeah, thanks, Ahmet. Hi, everyone. So now you're at the point you have super well organized experiments set up and have run a few experiments. And hopefully you are at the point that you want to start writing your research paper. So in the next two sessions, we will go through some general advice. So my session is going to be a little bit more practical advice about how to write a research paper, and then Ahmet will add more high level, like how to organize a paper and what to put in the paper. Mine is going to be a lot of, I see some questions for run, how much GPU requires. I don't know what you mean. Maybe you can elaborate on that question. But yeah, I can move on to my section. So the details of writing a scientific paper. One of the most important things is that there are some conventions and some styles that you should follow, but also consistency is actually more important than really like sticking to a particular principle. So there are like some principles, in my opinion, that are really good to follow, but also like you have to see what is your aesthetic and taste at the end of the day, and also like what your paper you want to look like. But it is important to be consistent in the paper when you write. So I don't know whether it's superficial or not, but really the look and feel of a paper matters. Like if you spend the time to follow these principles, then it looks more professional, and it looks like you put effort into that. And then hopefully your paper will be read more and just shared more, just because it's also nice to read. It also makes it much more easier to read in general if you follow these principles. So to get more concrete, so usually when you write a paper, you want to submit it to a conference, and each conference comes with a template and style. So start with the paper with the style of whatever conference you are aiming for. As a general advice, it's really good to use active voice, present tense, and simple and direct sentences and language in general to get your point across. If you have super long and complicated sentences, it doesn't mean that you are maybe smarter and or your work is more complicated. It's really important to communicate clearly what you have been doing. And for the rest, I want to just give some practical advice about what typesets to use in LaTeX to make it easier to write, collaborate on the draft, and have a polished final result. So first of all, it's important, probably if you are writing a machine learning paper, there's some math involved there, and it's important to follow correct principles and conventions in math. Here are some examples about some suggestions about, for instance, naming the variable, or if you have a function, or a particular word, if you want to talk about argmax, or these sorts of words, just what are the best practices to do that. I would really recommend checking out this very short but very helpful document on typesetting math in NLP and ML papers. We'll share the link with the slides later on with you as well. A lot of really questions about how to, what typesets to use in your paper. Then after the text, you also have figures. Hopefully you want your paper to look pretty. And there are some suggestions I would recommend to follow. So in general, and a general advice is that make the scripts of generating the plots and figures for your paper very clear and easy to use, because 100% you are going to regenerate every figure maybe 1 day before the deadline. There's always going to be changes, and it's important to have an organized code for that. I do suggest to use either the PNG or PDF format, so that when you zoom in or you print the paper, or presentation on a large screen, your images look sharp and clean. And also think about your color palette. It also helps to think about what colors go nice together, and what that gives a certain feeling to your paper, what color palette to use. When you are thinking about what to plot and how, think about what message you want to convey with that particular figure. So it's important indeed, you do become a designer, really, as you write more and more papers. But yeah, it's important to identify what you want to convey and make it really a standard point of the figure, so that it's easy to infer right away. I do also suggest don't trust the default values of Seaborn and Matplotlib, or whatever you are using for plots. It's nicer to just spend some time really thinking about, so essentially don't do the plot on the left, but do more on the example on the right. So thinking about what you want to highlight, where you want to draw the eye of the reader, the attention of the reader, what is the point of this plot, and spend time annotating your plots. You become good at it over time. This is something that with practice, once you do it once, you can do that also again afterwards. But I think this is really helpful to, essentially, it helps your figure message much more clear and cleaner to get across. It is also important to say that when you are thinking about like how to visualize creating these plots and figures, you don't want to mislead the reader. So you don't want to play around with scales and like variables and like how you are presenting, so that it's not you tell a different story or like a more exaggerated story of like what is actually happening. So there are like two different things. So thinking about the message and isolating that to highlight that, versus trying to play around with these sorts of like scaling to make or like different tricks to make the message a little bit different or more exaggerated. So and I'm sure like everyone here would also agree, but this is a good practice not to do that in general. And I think lastly on figures, in general, avoid dumping every information in just like one chart. It's always helpful to rethink about this, like one takeaway of each plot and what you expect the reader to look at and see and read, and make that really clear, so that just like trying different ways to visualize so that the message becomes much more clear. Remember that you have been working on this project for probably months, and you know right away when you look at a complicated plot what everything means. But a new set of eyes that come to your paper, and your paper is one of the 10 other papers that they might be reading that day. So it is really important to simplify and have a clear message for your readers. Tables. So you can do tables like this, but I suggest to just go with, when it comes with tables, less is more. So here's a nice animation of trying to simplify a table. Okay, so there are like some suggestions about how to align, for instance, how to make merge like different redundant information so that it's not too busy, spacing and highlighting how it can help, like where we want the eye of the reader to go to, and like what are the takeaways. And as you make these changes more and more to the table, you see that it becomes really a nice, much more easier to read from this table to that one that you already saw. So it's really just like a bunch of like good advice on like how to create nice tables, which you will also, it's like something that you can do and know like how to do once you try a few times. When it comes to citations in your paper, I think it's really important to, well, here I say like be generous in your citations, but that's also like in general, give credit to work before you. Like no one really expects your paper to be the first one to have done everything, and it's really important. And it doesn't have to be the most super close relevant papers. Just like it's okay to, and I think it's in general nice to cite everyone who has contributed in some way previously in different works that can maybe like make your work come to where it is now. And as a general rule of thumb, I think it's a good practice that if you have any statements in your paper where it's not common knowledge, it's not your contribution, and it's not like a much more like general background information, then it should be cited. So that's a good, you can think about like every sentence that you write, whether whether it comes from like someone else, or like this is a very common knowledge or your own contribution. And it's also like a good practice if you cite papers that are both on arXiv but also published in peer-reviewed conferences to cite the peer-reviewed version. It's a personal preference. And lastly, I think this is also like a nice, the BibTech Tidy website is a nice place where you can essentially clean up your BibTech list of references and citations, and like remove redundancies, have like common fields for every citation. So just like having like you can put your BibTeX through this website once and get a much nicer, cleaner text file to make a more comprehensive reference in your paper. And I think this is, almost the last slide for this part, which Ahmet will dive in much more right after this. But good practice to have to label sections and in your LaTeX file, and then reference different sections as you discuss different points in the paper. I think it's nice to not just use the more generic section titles like background, method, experiment, but really describe what you are doing in that section, so it's more informative what's going on there. And in general, it's important to think about what are the takeaways of your work and make that highlighted in each section, but mostly like introduction, conclusion, result. Like these are the parts that you really want to highlight your takeaways. I think, so with that introduction, I think Ahmet next will dive into what to write in the paper when you know now all of these like more like practical tricks and advice.
Thank you, Marzieh. That was pretty fun. Now you are managing like lots of experiments. You know how to write. Now it's come to a little bit what to write. I'm not sure the most fun part, but we should know that. So I have a question here. Maybe you can write in the chat, or you can think. Then after this presentation or all this session ends, you can reconsider like, okay, why did you like that paper? Like the question here is like, what are your favorite papers and why? But I will skip for now. So when it comes to what to write in a paper, I would like to start this general question with like, okay, how to read a paper actually, right? What to read in a paper, or what papers to read in general. This is relevant with the related work section. Oftentimes we have in our papers, right, like a related work or background, and because we need to contextualize and put our sort of story into the literature where it's positioned. And the related works is the first place that you can pick up some papers, read and understand like, or understand the connection with your own project. But also these days it's very common, like I personally do that. I follow lots of people in Twitter or in other social media places and look at or could be also archived daily, by the way. And I pick up some papers from these places as well. So I think this is also very helpful. At least it was very helpful for me. So in terms of the paper, what to write in paper, as Marzieh said, like you have lots of experiments, you have lots of results, you know actually what you want to tell in terms of like, let's say you have a method that works better compared to the baseline, you want to tell that. But in general, when you are thinking what to write in a paper, you should build a narrative, a story. You should tell a story because this is a content that you want people, the other researchers, to consume and to understand, to like, right? If you think in that way, then it becomes a real making a story. Okay, what is my problem? Why this is interesting? Why someone wants to read that? And why this is unsolved? I think these are, without those, if you just right away jump into, okay, this is my method, I did all this experiment, and these are the results. I mean, these are very nice, but without having this interesting part of the storyline, people may not really be able to understand. Then it comes to your novelty, your idea, based on your research project, obviously, whatever you are doing nice, then it is time to put that into the narrative. Exactly. So all this have in mind, the story should not be obviously organized based on chronological order, because maybe your experiments, you did experiments in different way, you pivoted the idea later on, or you added some super fundamental experiments later on as well. But you should build the story logically. I think this is quite important. So I want to just put this to emphasize the importance of prop. This is the same slide from the experimental management section. Again, like this, because also it's puts a nice connection between how you design the experiments and how you write the paper, because these are really, really almost very similar things, if not same. And like this is also core of your story, right? What is your problem? With what experiments, how you are answering this problem, and in general, research questions. Oh, you know, as all of us know, I mean, all the papers starts with the abstract, at least in our field. And abstract is, I think, in terms of like I want to tell this like if you think about the paper or research project as an onion, this is like the first piece is really your narrative, right? And each section or like section doesn't need to be like a method or experiment, but in general, what you are doing, you are putting another layer on top of another layer on top of. And abstract is the first layer for your core idea. Here, basically, you are just giving very brief overview of your storyline. Okay, this is the problem, this is the idea, and very little kind of spoiler about your experiments, that the experimental results potentially you wanted to highlight, and leave people to, okay, I as a reader, I want to read that paper, right? When I go over the papers on Twitter, for example, I first look at the abstract, very brief, then I look at the results and polls in most cases. So abstract is really important. Okay, this paper is doing that. Because people also may not have time at the beginning to read all the papers, right? That's just normal. The second part is introduction. Following the same analogy, like from the onion, now you are putting another circle or sphere on top of the abstract. Now here, I think the idea, how to contextualize, like contextualizing your problem setup and putting this your narrative or your idea into general literature. You should give a more comprehensive explanation or like a context about your research questions here. But when I say comprehensive explanation about research question, still in the introduction is brief. I think it is nicer not to put everything to introduction, because then people, like a reader may get really lost, right? You don't want to lose them, but you want to give full understanding about what you are doing in the paper for intro. So following the same idea, generally it's good to not start fully technical details, giving more about like, okay, what are you doing, how are you doing, what you are trying to achieve for the non-expert readers especially. Okay, yeah, this is, I think we briefly mentioned that is really about your storyline. Okay, some tips. These may not be applicable for all the papers, or this is really depends on how you prefer. But in general, I mean, we put here because I mean it looks nice in or it may help you or may help readers to understand. At the end of intro, if you put like what are your findings or what are your contribution with this paper, I think this is really nice, because after the abstract, people would really go through very quickly intro, and maybe end of the intro, if you have this sort of summary, okay, these are your findings or these are your contribution with this paper, it would be really, really nice. I think this is a good piece of advice. Second one, this is statistically approved. The image, there's a nice image summarizing your paper in the first page. I'm not sure where I read, but I think the papers that has that has image in the first paper gets accepted more than the papers don't have image in the first page. So this is not about, of course, quality of your research, but research at the same time, how you explain, how you communicate your research, right? So this will definitely help communicating your research in the paper. Okay, coming to the methods, of course, now this is the part that you will excel. You will put lots of details, mathematical formulations, all the content that you want to really be, I mean, probably proud of about your paper. This is the part, the method. Technical, I mean, in general, giving a technical background is important here. Let's say you have very sophisticated parameter efficient fine-tuning techniques beyond LoRa or adapters or anything. But still, for readers to understand, it's nice to give the background so that you show also how you come to that, your very sophisticated method, right? That would be nice. I think in terms of thinking the details, both breadth and depth is important here. Depth in terms of, okay, this is your method, or this is your technique or your data set. You give all the details here, so increase the depth, but also you need to increase the breadth in terms of, okay, like a background or similar methodologies, or in general giving a nice like for example, in the first picture you can see this efficiency at inference. For this particular paper, we wanted to put these kind of nice details, maybe not directly explaining our method, but explaining general, giving a general knowledge about the concept that we were working on. And I think readers, especially in machine learning, will like definitely this kind of nice details. That would be nice for increasing the breadth of the paper. Coming to another tip, more practical here about the method. In general, if you have a image or a visual that explain or summarize your methodology, it would be also very helpful for readers to understand. They might be really good at reading the formulas or understanding the concepts, but still, in any case, I think it's nice to summarize what are you doing with some images. It could be with some plots or some illustration, or it could be with like a simple code blocks. I think both works pretty nice in most cases. Second tip, yeah, we like general mathematical formulas, I guess. Personally, I like when I see, like, because this is, okay, you explain with, textually explain what you are doing in the paper, but especially if it is about like some methodology, depends on some machine learning algorithms, also giving brief formulas, it would be nice, because then, okay, maybe some people won't understand from the textual explanation, but then they will come back to formulas and will understand what you are doing. Okay, now I'm continuing from the main storyline here. The experiments, because your narrative you need to sort of validate your narrative, right? Okay, this was the problem in the field. This is my idea that you explain in the methodology. Okay, this is how I validate it, how I confirm that your idea is really working. So in general, we start with like like defining the stage or setting the stage, right? This is data set that you are using, experimental setup that you use, baseline that you are comparing, that all we discussed in the first experimental management session, and the evaluation that you are doing, all needs to be defined well, in my opinion. If you do not put some of the information here, reader will always have this sort of ambiguity, right? Okay, maybe it was clear, but you just did not put in those details here. But then we'll talk, okay, why this is not mentioned here, or maybe you are comparing with this baseline, but you missed that point. So to avoid such ambiguity, you should probably have like a really complete picture about your experimental setup in general. This is really important. For the results, I think what important area is like a really message. I think Marzieh also mentioned that. So when, of course, you have, again, lots of experimental results that's supporting your narrative, but you should highlight and you should make it brief that, okay, reader should get this message. It could be with one highlight table and a section or group of section that is referencing this table, right? And in general, I kind of like this title that actually gives the message right away, and then you increase the context about what you are doing here. Also, plots. This is a really important piece of all the papers, in my opinion, like visualizing some results. But each plot should serve a purpose. So it's not just because a plot looks very nice, but it should really be connected to something that you are saying in the corresponding section. I think this is obviously important. Some practical tips again for the results section. If you are using always the same type of plots, I think it's after some pages, it may get a little bit boring for the readers. That's why, in my opinion, this is really personal probably, but having a different type of plots makes the paper visually nicer and easier to read. And something that we started to use this template for some papers, having these small boxes explaining like the section findings, or it could be something else, but highlighting differently for each section is really also helping readers to, okay, I'm reading this long section now, but this section in the beginning or at the end want to give this message to me. That is nice for the reader as well. Conclusion, I mean, there's not much to say. We all know, but just one piece of advice: do not copy paste the abstract and some part of intro to the conclusion, because this is something I know in the lots of people, I mean, I included, tend to do it when we were junior researchers, but I think it's not good, because the conclusion, okay, people are read it, and if someone come to the end, probably read really thoroughly your paper, and here you should again return back, okay, what was my narrative, and what did I tell to the reader? I think this is nice. Putting limitations, some future consideration, future work pointers would be really nice, especially when I was a PhD student. I used to always look at the conclusion and try to find what pointers they give for the future work so that I can work on this future work. I think this is really nice. And if you put that, it would be really helpful also for people that you want to follow up on top of your work. Some small suggestions: try to start writing early on rather than through the end of the project, because as you write, you may notice, oh, this is not working, or maybe I should add this experiment. So to understand this full picture, it's better to start early. And when you are running experiments or doing small literature review for your experiments, always consider that you will use those materials in your paper, so that you don't need to redo those things. So when you are writing something as a literature review, write as in you will put in the paper. Or when you are summarizing your results to show your collaborators, do it as if you are going to put that thing in the paper, so that it will make more efficient, your life easier, and I mean, it will be more efficient in general. Yes. Now I will pass again to Marzieh for communication.
Yeah, thanks, Ahmet. So this is the last part of the discussion today. And now hopefully you're done with your experiments. You have written the first draft of your paper. It looks really nice, nice figures, nice tables and everything. And it would be nice to get some feedback about your draft. It can be from the mentors of the project, different members of the project. But also, like, if you are, for instance, part of our Discord, like, it happens that sometimes people would post, like, oh, I have this draft. If anyone is interested in the topic, like, they can do like a read through. And it's always helpful because it helps to polish the final results. So to get more eyes and hopefully nice feedback on your work. Here are some suggestions about how to do that. So it's in general important to prepare a concise summary of what your work is about if you are going to a new person for feedback. So if someone hasn't been involved in your project, in order to give a full view of what you did, it would also be helpful if you share all relevant material, like the code repo, like everything that you've done with them. They might not necessarily check everything, but they might come across like a question that like quickly they can check the answer in like some of the material that you have. It helps their feedback to be more helpful, hopefully. And of course, it's also nice to have a timeline in mind. It's important to respect the time of people that you ask for feedback on your draft, to give them enough notice, but also in general to give them a timeline so that they don't also delay the publication of your paper. And it's always helpful to ask for feedback early and often. You don't also have to wait until the last version of the paper. I think that's one really nice thing about our community and Discord, that there are people who are just like there to help out, and like you can ask questions, share in progress work there. It's usually more guided and directed if you also come up with specific questions about what you're looking for in their feedback. So is it just about maybe the writing of the paper, or is it more about like, is the methodology sound, is like how I'm doing the evaluation a correct way? So having specific questions also gives the mentors like a really nice point so they can respond back. And in this whole process, the main goal is to make your paper more solid. And I don't think we have to mention this, but in general, just be open to hear any type of feedback for your work. So it should, the feedback should come from a place of, like in a place that hopefully make the work better. But it's also important if there is, for instance, feedback about, oh, this might not be the best way to do this, or like there are some suggestions or things that are against what you have been doing, that to be open and accept and focus on what you are learning in this process rather than just like trying to stick to what you have done so far. And then you have a polished paper, and then you want to submit it to a conference. So when it's just like one quick note from experience that whenever you have a conference in mind, or you want to put your paper on archive and it's your first papers, one suggestion, create accounts there early, because sometimes it might take some time to activate, or like there might need some extra checks. Like it depends, like different conferences have different systems. Don't leave it until the day of the deadline to do all of these, because you might miss that. And if it's also like a very just like general suggestion, if they allow for multiple submissions, it's always good to submit an early version and then update the draft, so that you might not get stuck in the last minute crazy volume of submissions to a conference and then not go through. Then at a conference, usually you get reviews on your work, and then you have to work on a rebuttal. It's very helpful that think about what you're trying to do in the response. And I think it's important to think about what exactly is the question or complaint about, whether it's correct or not. So whether you need to clarify if it's incorrect, or whether if it's correct, you have to answer either by saying why it is the way it is, or by adding more experiments and more whatever the concern is about to support that. And in general, it's important to give evidence to everything that you are responding in the review process. So if you say, oh, we did this because of that, just add the reference or add the table of like the numbers, or like try to make it more grounded into your empirical or like previous works findings, and not just your opinion that like this is like how like this was the best thing to do and that's why we did that. And yeah, just like try to be polite, but also say what's on your mind and like why maybe they got it wrong, or like explain very clearly, so that hopefully in this rebuttal process, your paper's chance of acceptance at the conference would improve after you clarify the reviewer's concerns. And then congrats, you are at the point that your paper is accepted or published on archive. So now you have done everything you could do with preparing this paper, and it looks amazing, and you put it out there for the public eye to see. And I just want to briefly go over what to usually follow up after that. So first, in general, presentation. So it might be that you present at a conference, in your university group, in one of our like reading groups on the Discord, C4AI Discord. And a general rule of thumb is just try to think about connecting with your audience, not going through everything that you did in the paper. So who is your audience? And then when you prepare the presentation, I think there are like 2-3 main things to focus on. So why the problem you are working on is important. Like, is it a real problem? Why should we care that this is something that someone is working on? Showing something about why this problem is hard and not already solved, that's usually helpful. And then showing how you solve that. So these are the main goals of a presentation. And as usual with also the papers, writing, to the point, slides, uncluttered. A lot of visual elements can be helpful. Don't try to read from your notes. It's more natural to talk about and like more organic to talk about your work. And it's one of those things that it really changes and matters. With practice, you'll get better. So if you don't have any experience here, I suggest just also do that with your peers. Just like give mock presentations, or like start in smaller groups. And yeah, just like going over your presentation is something to polish how you tell the story of your paper. And then lastly, how things are nowadays is that you also present your work on social media. So that usually means on like Twitter, Blue Sky, and a few quick advice here. So usually each paper, for a paper, you can write, if it's like a Twitter or Blue Sky, like a thread of tweets, or it's like a LinkedIn post. General advice, start with a clear and engaging first or second sentence, so that it's very quickly to grab attention of the readers, and also somehow highlights why we should care about this. Why should I read the rest of this Twitter thread? Do, again, as before, use visuals also here to simplify complex ideas. And it can be visuals like plots and figures from your paper, but it also can be something that you create yourself, specifically for social media. And it doesn't have to be the most complicated graph or anything. It's just like, what do you want the takeaway for the audience to be right away? So in this case, for instance, if what you created is this huge data set evaluation benchmark, like the points of how many languages, like what is the size, what are different variations of the data, it's very easy and quick to get the point across with this visual. And then now you have grabbed the attention of the audience, then you have to write a short and accessible summary. So it should be technical enough that if someone is reading in that field who knows the technical details of that, they should understand what you did and like why it matters. But it shouldn't be super technical so that it alienates people who haven't worked on this at all. So there should be like some like middle ground. Summary is always helpful to have here. And it's also really nice if you wrap up by highlighting why this matters. What are the implications of what you found out? What are the real world applications, depending on your work? Like, why should someone care to continue or use or read, go and read your paper? And again, a more like superficial note, but it's always helpful to over-communicate the resources and material that connects to your work. So if you are releasing data sets, code repositories, like model artifacts, link them everywhere in the paper, in the Twitter thread, so that it's easy to find for anyone who wants to use them. It's also quite nice to engage with the audience. So if you post this huge Twitter thread and then people start discussions and ask questions, I mean, these are, I think, maybe like really basic things to say, but I think it's worth mentioning that it's really valuable to get your paper across when people see that you respond to questions, and they might come back again with more questions, or yeah, it just makes your paper and your work more visible in the field. And lastly, make it your own. All of these are suggestions. All of these are what we mentioned. Some of them are, I think, a must-have. Some of them are a nice-have. But in general, it's also important to what you are, especially about like how you want to communicate your work, to do it in your own style and how you think is important and nice and fun to do. So as long as you have the goal, which is to share why this was important, how you address this problem and what did you find out in the end, then like the style of that is something that you can do yourself. Great. So that's it. I'm going to hand it to Madeline now.
Wow. Thank you, Marzieh. Thank you, Ahmet. We knew this session would be full of practical tips. We didn't know it would be full of practical tips. We're at 2 minutes left in the hour, so I think we'll wrap it up now. But what's great is that later this week, Alejandra is hosting Julia for the Research Hangout. And the idea with this session is to continue the conversation we've started today. And so I hope many of you will be able to make it there. Think of it as the lab to this lecture. So this will be a really low-key environment to hang out and chat about some of these things, both experienced researchers themselves. So hope to see many of you at this session coming up on Thursday, and also share questions, comments in the Discord. We'll surface them. You can tag in Marzieh, Ahmet, or myself, and we'll get answers. And also share your own ideas. What's worked for you? We'll share the slides out afterwards, and let's keep chatting about this. Okay, great. And Ahmet's got it. Snuck in an answer to this question from Munir. Thanks, Ahmet. We got in there in the last minute. Marzieh, Ahmet, thank you. Wow, I think you have the new record for most tips per minute in a Roads to Research panel. This is a really valuable hour, and thanks to everyone who came out. Looking forward to seeing you all soon.